Have you ever heard that almost all countries in the world were in debt? America's debt had exceeded $38 trillion. The European Union had $14 trillion of debt. Japan's debt was around $9 trillion. Moreover, even strong economies like Germany, China, and Saudi Arabia were in debt. The real question was this: if everyone was in debt, who owned all this money? And this is where things started to get interesting. Debt wasn't seen merely as a burden. Back then, it was viewed as the backbone of the world. Everything, from economic crises to wars, from growth to collapse, depended on that invisible debt system. But when you kept following the trail of debt, you eventually came face to face with the strange truth. The world wasn't actually indebted to anyone. It was indebted only to itself. Of course, this didn't mean that everyone was earning equally. The world's total debt had surpassed $315 trillion at the time. This figure was almost 3 times the size of the global economy. So how had it come to this point? The answer goes back centuries. In 1694, England was at war with France, and its gold reserves were nearly depleted. The king saw the solution in knocking on the doors of wealthy merchants. "Give us money," he said, in return for which they would receive regular interest from future taxes. This was the birth of modern government debt. The Bank of England was established to manage this system. The step taken that day laid the foundation for the financial system that keeps today's world upright. Soon after, other countries adopted and developed this system. Over time, a state's capacity to borrow began to be seen as its true power. Once it had been important to conquer land. In the modern age, the power to issue bonds became what mattered. As time passed, debt became the common language of nearly the entire world. The US, Japan, Turkey, everyone was borrowing. If we ask again, who were these debts owed to? For example, half of the United States' $38 trillion of debt was actually owed to its own people, banks, and pension funds. Most of America's debt belonged to America itself. Only the remaining portion was distributed among countries like Japan, China, and the UK. This cycle wasn't unique to the US. Japan was lending to the US. The US was funneling money to Europe through the IMF. Europe was lending to developing countries, and those countries were investing their savings back into US and European bonds. In short, everyone was part of a giant cycle that worked with the mentality of, you lend to me, I'll lend to someone else. There was another hero behind the scenes: the financial markets, massive funds, central banks, and hedge funds. These actors determined which countries could borrow comfortably and which would struggle. When confidence in a country dropped, its economy could be shaken instantly. Central banks formed the heart of this system. When they bought bonds, they injected new money into the market. Money was essentially nothing more than a record of debt. No money in circulation was independent of debt. Did countries ever really consider paying off this debt? Of course not. Governments borrowed not to close their debt, but to continually roll it over. It was like a never-ending subscription. What kept the economy standing wasn't debt itself, but the trust placed in that debt. If the U.S. announced the next day that it had cleared all its debt, the world's most reliable investment instrument would disappear, and the global economy would collapse. That's why the purpose of the debt system wasn't to eliminate debt, but to keep it at a sustainable level. This cycle also had a side effect. The income earned from debt wasn't shared equally. Interest payments mostly went to major funds, banks, and wealthy investors. Thus, as debt grew, inequality grew along with it. In the end, the modern world seemed to survive on a balance game built on debt. The system functioned through the trust placed in this balance. But when that trust was shaken, debt revealed its true face: a promise that could not be carried forever.